سلام. در این سری از ویدیوهای کانال روژینز انگلیش میخوایم لغات موضوعهای پرتکرار آزمونهای زبان مثل آیلتس، تافل، دولینگو، PTE رو با هم کار کنیم. برای ساخت این ویدیوها از لغات 3 کتاب معروف کمبریج استفاده شده. خب این ویدیویی که میبینید متریال سکشن هست. در واقع ادامه ویدیوی قبلی هست و همون کلمه ها و کالوکیشن ها رو در فایل های صوتی و متن هایی که در این 3 کتاب استفاده شدن تدریس میکنم. خب بریم با کتاب اول شروع کنیم. کتاب Vocabulary for IELTS برای بند 6 یا لول اینترمدیت. Mega cities. The world's population is booming, nowhere more so than in its cities. Today, there are 33 megacities, each containing more than 10 million inhabitants, 3/4 of them in developing nations. By 2030, there are expected to be at least 27 megacities. Such a staggering rate of urbanization brings its own problems, especially in developing nations, where the majority of the megacities will be found. Employment and educational opportunities are the main attraction of urban centers, but hopes for a better life are often dashed as overpopulation puts an enormous strain on the infrastructure of the cities and their ability to provide basic necessities such as clean water and a place to live. Many rural migrants fail to find decent work and therefore cannot afford adequate housing. In some megacities, up to 50% of the residents live in slums. This problem is pressing, with the United Nations predicting that 2/3 of the world's population will be living in cities by 2050. If the infrastructure within those cities doesn't grow at the same rate, the result will be catastrophic. خب من برای معنی فارسی حالا خیلی کلمه به کلمه و جمله جمله نمیخوام دیگه معنی کنم. هر جایی که مهم هستش و هر کلمه‌ای که احساس کنم برای شما ممکنه سوال پیش بیاد رو توضیح میدم. خب بومینگ اینجا به معنی یه توسعه سریع، یه جهشی در تعداد و اندازه چیزی. وقتی اتفاق میفته میگیم something یا هر چیزی is booming. Population is booming. Nowhere به معنی هیچ جا بیشتر از شهرها این اتفاق برایش نیفتاد. Staggering به معنی سرسام‌آور. Enormous. Staggering rate یه نرخ رشد سرسام‌آور و خیلی بزرگ. Employment and educational opportunities به معنی فرصت‌های تحصیلی و شغلیه. Urban centers مراکز شهری. Hopes are dashed یعنی امیدها برباد رفت، امیدها از بین رفت. دقت کنید که hopes یعنی hope countable قابل شمارشه، اسم میگیره. Strain به معنی فشاره. Put an enormous strain on the infrastructure of the city یعنی یه فشار خیلی زیاد و بزرگی روی زیرساخت‌های شهر به وجود میاره. Decent work یعنی کار خوب، کار آبرومندانه. میتونه اینجا کلمه adequate هم بیاد ها. Adequate work یعنی کارهای کافی. Slum محله‌های کثیف و فقیرنشین، زاغه‌ها. کاتاستروفیک یعنی فاجعه. نتیجه یه فاجعه میشد اگه همینطوری نرخ رشد ادامه پیدا کنه. What are the main problems associated with living in a big city? Can anything be done to solve these problems? Whose responsibility is to solve these problems? این سوالا رو شما توی اسپیکینگ پارت 3 ممکنه ازتون با موضوع شهر ازتون بپرسن. خب در ادامه نمونه جوابی که میتونیم به این سوالا بدیم رو با هم یاد میگیریم. Big cities can be overcrowded, so there are a lot of people competing for each job and for accommodation. The lack of job usually means that there is a lot of poverty in big cities. And also there are a lot of people around them. Many people feel very isolated in big cities, and it's particularly difficult to the elderly. 2. I think we need to be more tolerant to each other. I think it helps if we try to create small communities within the bigger cities, so we should try to include people rather than exclude them. Well, we all have to take responsibility for these problems, and we can all do something to help. But the government is also responsible to a certain extent as well. They need to make sure that the poor are looked after and that they have access to the facilities they need. خب بریم کتاب دوم، کتاب vocabulary for IELTS، بند اسکریپ 6.5 و بالاتر. خب یه متن عالی رو میبینیم که برای رایتینگ میتونه بهتون ایده بده و از ساختار و کلمات و کالوکیشناش میتونید استفاده کنید. One of the main disadvantages of rural life in developed country is the sense of isolation many people can feel. There isn't a developed public transport system, so people are very dependent on their cars to get around. It's often difficult for city dwellers to appreciate the benefits of the rural lifestyle, so it can be difficult to persuade doctors and teachers to come and work in the countryside. However, people born and raised in rural areas enjoy the slower pace of life and often feel overwhelmed by the frantic pace of the city. Life may be simpler in the countryside, but people living there enjoy the traditional aspects that exist because things have remained relatively unchanged for hundreds of years. یه متن عالی که میتونید برای ایده در رایتینگ و حتی اسپیکینگ استفاده کنید. The human species evolved some 2 million years ago. Our natural habitat was the savanna, where our forebears made their living by hunting and gathering. This way of existence required frequent moving. Within Europe, permanent settlement became the rule only after the Agrarian Revolution, which appears to have started some 10,000 years ago. Most people came to live in farmhouses, often grouped in villages. A few villages developed into towns and even cities. However, the percentage of the population that lived in an urban setting remained small in an agrarian society. In medieval Europe, some 90% of the population lived in the country. This pattern changed drastically after the Industrial Revolution, when, in less than 2 centuries, massive urbanization took place. Curiously, this massive exodus from the land to the city wasn't accompanied by negative attitudes to rural living. In fact, the reverse occurred. It would seem that the less rural life is practiced, the more it is cherished and the greater the emphasis on the hazards of urban life. In the years following the Industrial Revolution, a new artistic theme emerged, the theme of pastoral idyll. Lyrics, novels, and paintings began to emphasize the beauty of the nature and the virtues of rural life. A constant undertone in this theme is that rural living is more satisfying than life in the town. We are led to believe that in the country we can find the safe, simple serenity that is so desperately needed by the alienated city dweller. In reality, various studies on life satisfaction have revealed that there is no advantage to live in a rural setting. In developed countries, rural people tend to be just as satisfied with life as city people. Moreover, in developing countries, rural dwellers are markedly less happy than city dwellers. The results of a survey conducted to find out where people would prefer to live given the choice show that the pattern of preference is in fact the reverse of the pattern of settlement. Rural living is preferred more in the most urbanized part of the world, while urban living is seen as most desirable in the least urbanized parts. اکسدس داشتیم قبلا مهاجرت دست جمعی مردم رو میگن. practice اینجا به معنی تجربه شده. یعنی it would seem that the less rural life is practiced جایی که به نظر میرسه کمتر زندگی روستایی تجربه شده. cherished یعنی گرامی داشته شده، یعنی در مورد خوبیاش خیلی حرف زده شده باشه. pastoral ideal شعری که در وصف زندگی روستایی سروده شده باشه. یعنی حس و حالی که راجع به خوبیای زندگی روستایی خیلی اغراق‌آمیز ستایش بشه و در موردش تبلیغ بشه. virtue یعنی مزایا، فضایل، خوبیای یه چیزی. undertone یعنی تهرنگ که تو نقاشی هم خیلی استفاده میشه. a constant undertone یه تهرنگ و یه حال و هوای دائمی از یه چیزی مثلا وجود داشته باشه یه جایی. We need a stronger police force to help keep the crime level in our major cities down. The city has far more recreational facilities than rural areas, so young people don't get bored so easily. An efficient sewage system and frequent garbage collection are both essential to maintaining sanitation in densely populated area. Traffic congestion creates enormous problems for people traveling around the city at peak times. Many people who move to the city from rural areas end up living in shantytown because of a shortage of housing. It's difficult to determine where the city ends because of the urban sprawl.
Track 25. Speaker 1.
I moved here about 2 years ago. Although I loved the peace and tranquility of the area where I grew up, I wanted to be an interior designer, and there are very limited opportunities for that type of work there. So I really had no choice but to become an urbanite. I have to say, I do miss the fresh air though. But living in the country can have its disadvantages too. I only have to walk down the street now to my local supermarket, which is really convenient. But where my parents live, you have to travel for several hours to get to the nearest shops.
Speaker 2.
I came here after I graduated from university. I've always wanted to be a vet, but city vets really only deal with pets, and I wanted to work with larger farm animals. It's really interesting work, but because all the properties are so spread out, it's easy to feel isolated at times. That's why it can be tough for children out here. They don't have a lot of choice when it comes to education. They either have to go to boarding school or be schooled at home. Having said that, they have a lot more freedom here because it's a really safe environment for them. I love my life here now, and I don't miss the city at all.
Track 26.
A megacity is usually defined as a metropolitan area with a total population in excess of 10 million people. Some definitions also set a minimum level for population density, with a figure of at least 2,000 inhabitants per square kilometre. A megacity can be a single metropolitan area, or it can be made up of two or more areas that converge or join together. This is sometimes referred to as a metropolis. Looking right back through history, for almost 1,000 years, Rome was the largest, wealthiest, and most politically important city in Europe. Rome's population passed 1 million by the end of the 1st century BC. However, during the early Middle Ages, its population declined to a mere 20,000. By this time, what had been a sprawling city was reduced to groups of inhabited buildings spread among large areas of ruins. In 1800, only 3% of the world's population lived in cities, but this figure had risen to 47% by the end of the 20th century. In 1950, New York City was the only urban area with a population of over 10 million, and there were 33 cities with populations exceeding 1 million. However, by 2007, this number had risen to 468. If the trend continues, the world's urban population will double every 36 years. The UN has predicted that today's urban population of 4.2 billion will rise to more than 6 billion by 2050, when more than 3 out of 5 people will live in cities. In the 2000s, the largest megacity was the Greater Tokyo area. The population of this metropolis includes areas such as Yokohama and Kawasaki, and is estimated to be between 35 and 38 million. This variation in estimates can be accounted for by different definitions of what the area encompasses. A characteristic issue of megacities is the difficulty in defining their outer limits. At present, 1.2 billion people, or 1/6 of the world's population, now live in shantytowns. In many poor countries, overpopulated slums have high rates of disease due to unsanitary conditions. The UN estimates that by 2050, more than 2 billion people in the world will be living in slums.
Test practice, track 4. You will hear a telephone conversation between an estate agent and a woman who is looking for accommodation.
Hello, I wonder if you could help me. I'm moving to Liverpool next month and I need to find suitable accommodation.
Yes, of course. Do you have an area in mind?
Well, I've got a job at the Children's Hospital, so I was hoping for something nearby.
OK. The hospital you're talking about has some very nice suburbs around it. The first one I'd recommend you look at is Broad Green.
Right. And can you tell me a bit about the area? I'm thinking especially of things like getting around. I've got a car, but I'm not a very confident driver, so I try to use some other means of transport when I can.
Well, this area has a really good bus service, and there's a train station for when you need to get into the city too. So it's really convenient as far as that's concerned.
Good. It's always nice to have a choice.
Where are you moving from?
I'm living in London at the moment, so this is quite a big change for me. Parking can be a real problem here, and it's so expensive. Is that the same in Liverpool?
Yeah, my sister lives in London and she has to pay to park in her own street. You'll be glad to hear we don't have that issue here.
That's great. I'm hoping the cost of living will be a lot less than in London too. What are the rents like? Here, it's over £200 a week on average, and that's in the cheaper areas.
Wow. Well, you'll be glad to know the average weekly rent here is around £120. And you get a lot more for your money too.
That's what I was hoping. I'm paying £250 a week for one tiny room.
You won't want to go back once you've lived up here.
There must be some downsides. It's sounding too good to be true. I bet there are no nice parks or anything like that.
No, you'll find plenty of those. Some people do complain that they have to travel a bit to do their grocery shopping, though. The area could do with a few more shops.
Well, that doesn't sound so bad. So, is there any other area I should look at as well?
Yes, I'd recommend West Derby. Now, it doesn't have a train station, but the bonus for you is that it's within walking distance of your hospital.
Sounds perfect.
Yes, and if you have children, it also has some of the best schools in the city.
That's not an issue for me. I live on my own. I'm hoping for something small and easy to look after, like a flat.
That may be a problem here then, because this area has mostly larger houses with gardens. Would you be willing to share a larger rental with others in the same situation?
No, I'd rather have my own space, so I guess I may be disappointed there.
Well, it's a lovely quiet area with hardly any traffic, but the accommodation can be on the expensive side.
I'll have to think about that then. I'd really like to take a look at both areas before I decide. I'm coming up for a meeting next week. Would it be possible to look at some places then?
Well, I'm in the city centre office, but we actually have an office in West Derby, and the guy who works there is a really good friend of mine. He'll be able to show you what we have on our books.
Great. Can you give me his contact details?
Yes, his name is John Godfrey. That's Godfrey.
Right, I've got that. And do you have a telephone number I can reach him on? I'll give him a call to see if I can set something up.
He's always out and about, so I'll give you his mobile number. It's 0451 666 3891.
Great. And do you know if he'll be free to meet me next week?
What day are you coming up?
I'm there for almost a whole week, from next Tuesday to the following Monday. But I have meetings on the first few days.
I'm sure he'd be able to manage the Friday. It's really only Saturdays when it's more difficult to leave the office.
That should be fine. I'll definitely give him a call. Thanks for all your help.
خب اینجا کتاب سوم یا کتاب گرامر و لغات برای ادوانس ها رو با هم دیگه کار میکنیم. Urban sprawl is the unchecked spreading of a city or its suburbs. It often involves the construction of residential and commercial buildings in rural areas, otherwise undeveloped land on the outskirts of the city. Typical residents of these areas living in single-family homes and travel by car to their jobs in the city. Concerns over urban sprawl largely focus on negative consequences for residents and the local environment. The tendency of people living in these neighborhoods to commute to work means that urban sprawl is sometimes associated with increased air pollution from car exhaust fumes. The Eiffel Tower is one of the most popular tourist attractions in the world. Our council is doing everything it can to combat traffic congestion, including charging drivers every time they drive into the city center. The underground is an integral part of the public transport system in many large cities. Since the town center became a traffic-free pedestrian area, shopping has been a more pleasant experience. Exhaust fumes from cars, buses, and lorries are the main cause of air pollution in cities. There are frequent traffic jams during the morning and evening rush hours in many towns and cities. Our neighborhood doesn't have any crime. It's a crime-free neighborhood. There is a zone around the house where cars cannot go. It's a car-free zone. The council is planning to make the city center suitable for cyclists. It's going to be a cyclist-friendly center. I need accommodation where they allow pets. I need pet-friendly accommodation. The young people around here are all obsessed with their cars. They are all car mad. Many of my colleagues are obsessive with their work. They are all work mad. I just love all the hustle and bustle. In my work and my social life, I come into regular contact with people from all over the world. You just take for granted the incredible range of entertainment on offer. The only downside is the cost of living. Her parents own a flat in the center of London. It was really convenient just being able to hop on a bus or take an underground. Crime rates are higher in cities than in rural areas. I love the hustle and bustle of life in the city. Some people move to country for the peace and quiet. We have been weighing up the pros and cons of commuting. Most people have ups and downs at work. We need some give and take between residents and developers. Hustle and bustle. شلوغی و جنب و جوش و سر و صدا. Peace and quiet. آرامش و سکوت. Pros and cons. خوبیا و بدیا. موافق و مخالف. Ups and downs. بالا و پایین. سختیا و راحتیا. Give and take between دو تا چیزی. یه چیزی and یه چیز دیگه. یعنی بده بستون بینشون.
Unit 26. Recording 33.
I grew up in a quiet, remote rural area, but I've lived here in the heart of the city since I was a student. The traffic and the noise don't bother me. I just love all the hustle and bustle. I work at one of the top art galleries, a 10-minute walk from here. In my work and my social life, I come into regular contact with people from all over the world. It's really interesting. And being here, you just take for granted the incredible range of entertainment on offer. Theatres, cinemas, nightclubs, concerts of all kinds. As far as I'm concerned, the only downside is the cost of living. My rent's nearly twice what it would be if I moved to a smaller town.
The nearest I came to living in a big city was spending 2 weeks at the home of an old school friend. Her parents own a flat in the centre of London. It was really convenient, just being able to hop on a bus or take the underground. At first it gave me quite a buzz, being somewhere where so much was going on, but I don't think I relaxed the whole time I was there. What got to me was the constant noise all day and all night. I also felt a bit nervous if I was out on my own, especially at night. Perhaps it was a subconscious awareness that crime rates are higher in cities than in rural areas. It was a real relief to get home.
خب با توجه به این که من در ویدیو قبلی همه لغات و کالوکیشن های وایس ها و متن ها رو کامل تدریس کردم، معنی کردم، تلفظ ها رو گفتم، دیگه لازم ندیدم که اینجا تک تک جمله ها رو معنی کنم. ولی اگر واقعا نیاز هستش به من در کامنت ها بگید که دوباره شروع کنیم مثلا وایس ها رو من ترجمه کنم و بگم. ولی خب نیاز نیست واقعا. اگر اونو کامل و با دقت کامل دیده باشید و یاد گرفته باشید میتونید راحت مفهوم جمله ها رو و یا این ترک وایس ها رو، فایل های صوتی رو کامل متوجه بشید و بفهمید. اگر جایی گیر کردید حتما به اون ویدیو قبلی مراجعه کنید و باز اگر جایی سوال داشتید، موردی بود که فکر کردید خوب توضیح داده نشده، حتما اینجا برای من کامنت بذارید و برای اونا هم یه ویدیو میسازم. ممنون ازتون که با من همراه هستید. برای اطلاع از ویدیوی جدید کانال رو سابسکرایب و زنگوله رو بزنید. ممنونم که با لایک و کامنت به من دلگرمی میدید. هر جای این کره خاکی هستید خوب و خوش و سلامت باشید.